Hello, Peter for Sana Zero here, Cyrus. Welcome to my review for Bioshock Infinite. Now, I wasn't sure if I was going to review this game, mostly because I really haven't reviewed a FPS before, so I wouldn't really know how this would turn out. I mean, I have played FPSs before, but I never really reviewed one. But I decided to go with it since, well, Bioshock Infinite is a game that's worth talking about, if only because of the hype it receives and the massively positive reception it got from both critics and fans alike. And for the fact that I'm a big fan of the original Bioshock for its great story and twist, the world of Rapture being both immersive and very interesting, the plasmids being pretty fun to use, and the old school shooting mechanics was fun, though a bit flawed. So, suffice to say, I was really hyped when I heard Bioshock Infinite was coming out. So in the end, the ultimate question that I have to ask myself is, did Bioshock Infinite do enough to meet my high expectations? Well, let's find out and start this review. Bioshock Infinite is a first-person shooter that was developed by Irrational Games and published by 2K Games. It is available for the PS3, Xbox 360, and the PC. I will be reviewing the Xbox 360 version of the game.
I'm talking about, brought to you courtesy of Mr. Jeremiah Fink himself. Who amongst you?
Visually, the game looks great on the Xbox 360. Character models are detailed, the environments via the floating city of Columbia is just breathtaking in terms of how it's designed, and the art style overall is just great. The overall world of Columbia is just presented in such a way that it feels very immersive and draws you in, that it really makes it feel like you're in a legit floating city that's set in an alternative 1900 American setting with a decent amount of steampunk mixed with it. Especially with how vibrant the city of Columbia is when you're first going through it, and how the two main characters in the game interact with the city of Columbia. While Bioshock Infinite is not the most graphically intense game out in the market, it's still a great looking game, although there are a few texture problems here and there. And the animation is great as well, whether it's seeing character having pretty natural movement, or to even how some of the gun fires. And the special effects you see from the vigor attacks you can use in the game is also pretty cool to see and witness when you do use the vigors. So the overall visuals of Bioshock Infinite are fantastic, and I really have no complaints as I went through the game. Story-wise, the game gets to play as Booker DeWitt, who is tasked to retrieve a particular woman named Elizabeth from the floating city of Columbia and take her to New York so he's able to pay off his debt that he owned. Initially, things seem to be going pretty smoothly with him being able to get into the city without incident. Well, except for the almost drowning part.
I don't know, brothers and sisters, but this one doesn't look clean to me.
But at least there's no direct confrontation yet. But that quickly changes as Booker heads further into the city, trying to find out where Elizabeth is located, which he does, which is at Monument Island, where he suddenly gets labeled as the false prophet, which basically gets the city against him. And note that anybody in this city can go against you.
Jesus! Hell out of here!
And thus begins the journey of Booker DeWitt, trying to get Elizabeth and then trying to take her out of Columbia. Overall, the story is just simply fantastic. The intro really draws you in the story and really gets you immersed into the world that Irrational Games have created, such as when you're first going through the fair, enjoying the festivities, interacting with the games. It really makes it feel like this is a really living city, and sort of like a utopia. And the way how the game shows you how the city isn't as idyllic as it appears to be is really good. Anyway, moving along past through the intro, the events that lead you to getting Elizabeth and trying to get her out of Columbia is really exciting and intense, and the set pieces is also really cool. But the game also gives you time to breathe with its slow moments, so you don't get overwhelmed with the action, which usually results in characterization and character development of the two main leads, which did lead me to really care for the main characters and motivated me to go through the story. And is probably my favorite part of the middle, if I have to be honest. And the game uses of interdimensional travel / time travel is really interesting, and does give the story a good amount of mystery intrigue, which did get me want to play more to find out what's going to happen next. In terms of how they were actually going to advance the story using interdimensional travel, or how interdimensional travel works in general. And the twist ending is really good. Now, is this twist as good as the original Bioshock? That's debatable, but it's still a great twist. The twist ending is conclusive, drives home the redemption theme, and it just gives you this feeling of revelation where you finally have all the pieces of a puzzle, then you're putting them together, then you figure out the whole story behind it, which also does change some of your perspective of the events in the main story itself. And now I'm gonna go talk about the characters. The characters are, for the most part, great, which is kinda important since this story is really character driven, to the point where you can really say that this story is really a character study about one particular character in the game. Anyway, talking about the characters. The duo of Elizabeth and Booker are really interesting, and seeing the character growth of Elizabeth from the start to the end of the game due to how she deals with the situation that occurs is great. And also finding about Booker's past is also really interesting as well. And the interaction between Elizabeth and Booker is pretty good. Their personality really does bounce off each other pretty well, and really does make for some interesting conversations. And I did like seeing the relationship between Booker and Elizabeth, and how it formed and how it developed throughout the entire game. The Lucetti twins are also really fun with their nonchalant personality.
Following me.
We were already here.
Why are you following us?
Aperitif.
What was that?
Surprising.
Surprising that it worked.
Surprising that it didn't kill him.
A magnetic repulsive field in one's body can come in.
If it doesn't kill you.
And the fanatical leader of Columbia, Comstock, is also a pretty well done antagonist as well. And learning his backstory is really interesting in this game. Though if you were to say if I think he's as good as Andrew Ryan, no, I still think Andrew Ryan is the better antagonist between the two. The lore in Bioshock Infinite is pretty interesting and in-depth as well, which you can learn from the various voxophones you find throughout the game, or just from hearing the dialogue from the NPCs. And the themes that the game portray in the world building, such as patriotism, religion, is also done extremely well. And overall, Bioshock Infinite's strongest feature is probably this tale of redemption that the games try to tell you that revolve around these pretty interesting characters. With that said, I do have problems with the story. Firstly, the Vox Populi, for the sole fact that they're really underutilized in the story itself. I personally thought they would get a more prominent role in the story, what with being the resistance that opposed Comstock. But nope, they get basically shoehorned into the side at about 2/3 of the game. Or not even that, get shoehorned to the background. And abruptly appears at the last part of the game, where it seems really forced to me. It's just like the Vox Populi coming up and saying, "Hey, we're in this story too, remember?" I mean, it makes sense why they be there, but there's really no build up to it at all. And one more thing, with how underutilized the Vox Populi is, I even have more issue with how underutilized Daisy is in this story. I mean, seriously, I seriously thought she would have a more prominent role, but she's used so less in the story that she's barely memorable. My other problem is the getting the weapons for the resistance part of the story drags, and I mean really drags. I mean, I can understand why, since they were using that section of the story to explain how the tears work, which is the interdimensional travel stuff. But seriously, they could have cut it down a bit, in my honest opinion. It just really dragged. But even with those issues, the story is still top notch, and it's just a very well written story overall. The voice acting overall is also fantastic, with Booker being voiced by Troy Baker, Courtney Draper voicing Elizabeth, Kif Vando Huvo voicing Comstock, and Lindsay Kiley and Oliver Valkyrie voicing the Lucetti twins, and they just do a fantastic job with it and really adds to the characters. The music is also great as well. Overall, the presentation of Bioshock Infinite is top notch, with the breathtaking world of Columbia in both its visual presentation and world building, and the story and characters of Bioshock Infinite are just fantastic.
Here, ammo!
Gameplay-wise, Bioshock Infinite plays out like a first-person shooter. You'll be using a variety of guns and vigors in order to clear a group of enemy and progress the game, with you using guns for one hand and using the vigors for the other hand. You'll also be able to sprint, use the skyhook for a variety of actions, and be able to equip gear to better your chances to survive. Oh yeah, you also got the traditional HP bar with the regenerating shield system, kinda like how the original Halo works. Sprinting and using a variety of guns you have at your disposal is self-explanatory, though do note that the game uses a 2-weapon limit system. Vigors are basically plasmid in this game, which are essentially magical type of attacks, which uses the MP type of meter, which is called the salt meter, which is located at the bottom left corner. The vigors can range from throwing fireballs and thunderbolts to even summoning deadly crows that can confound the enemy for a short period of time. Oh man, did I actually wrote that? Moving on! Along with using the vigor's attack normally, you can also manipulate the vigor to set up traps which cost more salt than usual, but if the trap is detonated, the result will be more potent than your standard vigor attacks. The skyhook is basically a melee type of attacks, which you can also use finishing moves on your opponent if they're about to keel over, but the most noteworthy thing about the skyhook is the skyline mechanic. Now, Bioshock Infinite getting set up on a flying city, and the fact that the level design of Bioshock Infinite is pretty open, the game sets up Skyline, which is basically like a rail system, which is basically the means with how you're able to travel from point A to point B, or from various vantage points on the battlefield to either get a better position on enemy units, or as a means to retreat if you're taking too much of a beating. You'll also be able to do an attack from above with the skyline mechanic using the skyhook, which can cause a good amount of damage to enemy units. Now I talk about the gears. When going through the game, you'll also be able to collect various items that you're able to equip on Booker from the customization screen, which will give various effects to Booker. You'll also be able to upgrade your weapons at vending machines. Okay, next thing I'll talk about is Elizabeth, who is your AI companion. And she's actually not useless. Anyway, while in combat, Elizabeth will be able to aid you in combat in two significant ways. The first is providing you with various support items, from handing you ammo for your current weapon to handing you restorative items that can restore either your health or salt meter. The second feature that Elizabeth brings to the table is more significant with the tear mechanic. Now, Elizabeth has the ability to manipulate the various tears that you come across the game, which are characterized by objects being in black and white, and bring those materials from other dimensions to the dimension you're currently in. This can range from getting various guns, to warping in building structures that can either serve as a barricade against bullets, or getting you to elevate positions, and etc. But do note that she can only bring in one tear at a time. So if you're trying to bring in another tear, the tear that you were using before will disappear. Though for actual firearms that you actually get from the tear, you still get to keep those, strangely enough. Oh yeah, and also note that Elizabeth can't die, since she basically has invincibility. But seeing how she can't really use a weapon, and she's more use a support role, it's pretty balanced and she doesn't really trivialize the game. Oh yeah, Elizabeth is also able to pick locks when you gather enough lockpicks for a particular door. Level design is pretty open with how big the battlefield can be, and with the game providing multiple vantage points you can take advantage of with the use of the skyline mechanic, and also with the emphasis on the exploration of areas, though do note that the progression from area to area is still pretty linear. Lengthwise, it took me about 12 to 15 hours to complete the game, and it also really doesn't have much replay value looking at it in a gameplay point of view. The game offers a wide range of difficulties ranging from easy, normal, and hard. Though personally speaking, I play on the hard difficulty, and I didn't really find it that hard. It was moderately challenging, but still not that difficult. So that difficulty would probably be the one I recommend you to play, since I can only imagine how easy and normal is in comparison. Overall, the gameplay is good. Yeah, good. Oh man, by that tone, you probably think I don't like the gameplay, but I do. I really do. But I'm just surprised that the gameplay is praised so much, since, well, when you get down to it, the gameplay is not all that impressive. The gameplay is still good, but there are some problems with it. Okay, the first thing I should get out of the way, this game is pretty streamlined, with it being a sort of hybrid where the game meets a middle ground between being a twitch shooter and a tactical shooter. But nonetheless, it's still streamlined with how weapons have no multiple animal types, the 2 weapon limit system, the regenerating shield, and etc. But you see, being streamlined doesn't inherently make it a bad thing. Okay, I list the things I found good in Bioshock Infinite gameplay. The controls are tight, the gunplay is intense and fast-paced, more fast-paced than the previous Bioshock games, and on a much more larger scale. The weapons are pretty satisfying to use, with my favorite being the hand cannon. The weapon variety is fine. I probably do like the weapon variety of the previous games better, but the variety in this game is still fine, though there are basically recolors of weapons in the last 25% of the game with only minor modifications. The Vigors are tons of fun, with each having their uses, such as Bronco making the enemy float in the air and using the shotgun to blow them away, or using the shock jockey against the mechanized patriots, which will stall the machine for a few seconds. And overall, the Vigors does add variety to the gunplay, and the trapping mechanic is a welcome addition. I even go so far to say that the Vigors are better in this game than the plasmids in the previous games. The skyline mechanic is pretty good as it gives you tactical options, and it also complements pretty well with the game being more large scale, allowing you get to place at a pretty moderate pace. Elizabeth is a welcome addition, with her providing you support items that will help you in battle, but she doesn't do it too often that it trivializes the difficulty. And the terror mechanic is pretty awesome, with it giving you a good amount of tactical options, such as bringing robot allies in the fight, bringing infrastructure to block enemy attacks, and overall, the balance is relatively good in terms of pure gameplay, well, for the most part. I also like how the game rewards you for exploring, whether it's for getting voxophones to learn more about the fascinating world of Columbia, or getting infusions that will increase either your HP, salt, and shield meter. And there is still the health and salt management in the game for it to be a bit tactical, since health and salt don't recover, so you still have to be aware of how much damage you can take or how much vigors you'll be using. And I also don't have much problem with the 2 weapon limit, since the game does provide a variety of weapons, whether it's from them laying around the battlefield, getting them from tears, or getting them from enemy units. And for these elements alone, the gameplay is good. But then, we run into the problems. First and foremost, the AI is not that good. I even go so far to say it's lacking at times. They really just go out and in the open and shoot you without really taking cover or taking use of the environments, except for using the skyline to go where you are. And speaking of AI, Elizabeth AI is being proclaimed as being revolutionary. And my response? Really? I mean, her pathfinding AI is rather good, and she does typically give you support items at a moderate pace, and further in the game when she's not available, you will miss her presence. But I do find that her AI being proclaimed as revolutionary is overhyping it a bit. The next thing I think is lacking is the enemy variety. Not that it's lacking in terms of enemy types, but for the fact the game doesn't really throw much of the more unique enemies at you throughout the game. For probably about 75 to 80% of the game, you'll be fighting regular foot soldiers. The more unique soldiers, like the fireman, are not that common, and I did wish there were more of them. And even more of a flaw is the repeating boss battle with a particular story boss, which is really annoying. Third problem I have with this game is that the gear to collect is basically useless. Albeit there are some gears that are pretty good, but most of them don't really add much to overall gameplay. Another thing I found a bit odd. I say it's odd because the original Bioshock also suffered from this problem that I'm about to talk about. But Bioshock Infinite handles it better, but I still think there's a few problems with it. Though this problem is rectified when you go from 1999 mode, so yeah. But I still feel that this needs to be addressed. Now, what is this problem, you ask? I think the penalty for failure is way too lenient on every other mode except 1999 mode. I mean, I think it's clever how they integrated the respawning system into the actual story itself, but it's still way too lenient in my opinion. I mean, the only penalty for you actually dying in this game, well, for easy, normal, hard, is losing money. The enemy you kill won't come back, and you get extra ammo for your weapons too. Albeit the enemies still get some of their health back, well, the enemies that remain, but you still got extra ammo. So yeah, I still think it's way too lenient in my opinion. Also, one more nitpick. I do wish that the actual level design had more choke points so I can use the trapping mechanics more, because as it is, I do feel that the trapping mechanics with the Vigor trapping and environmental traps isn't used to its fullest potential. Heck, I find that the environmental traps you can bring in through tears to be absolutely useless. But overall, I still think the gameplay is still a lot of fun. The gunplay is fast paced and intense, the larger scale combat is pretty good. Elizabeth is a great addition in terms of how she helps you with support items and the tear mechanic. The flaws are apparent, like the bad AI, enemy variety, but I still the game does a good enough job in the gameplay department that it's a lot of fun when you're first going through the game.
Will the circle be unbroken?
So in the end, does Bioshock Infinite meet my expectations of being part of the Bioshock series? Yes! Do I think it's as good as critics are saying it is? Yes and no. The visual presentation, story, characters, and world building of Bioshock Infinite are top notch and are well deserving of its praise from both fans and critics alike, with how Columbia is breathtaking with its visuals and really interesting with its world building, and how the story just enthralled me from start to finish, with all these characters being really fascinating, with Booker and Elizabeth interaction and development being the prime example. And while there are a few flaws in the narrative, like the weapon arc dragging, I still think the story is just amazing, and it's probably one of the best storylines that this generation of console game has to offer. And really, you should go out and buy the game just for that. But the part I don't think matches the hype is the gameplay. Why Bioshock Infinite has relatively good gameplay, with the gunplay being fast paced and intense, Vigors being tons of fun to use, both the skyline tear mechanic adds a few tactical elements to the game, and etc. But those elements by themselves doesn't really make the gameplay great. Even then, it got a few problems such as the bad AI, enemy variety, etc. But still, looking at it as an overall package, it's still a fantastic game. and it's still probably going to be one of the best games to come out this year. So check out the game if you haven't already, and be sure to come in this game without knowing the story.